Imagine a man standing on the bank of a small river. On one side lies his home, the republic he has served his entire life. On the other side lies a path to absolute power, a path that begins with treason. He is the most popular man in the world, the conqueror of Gaul, a military genius who has won the adoration of his soldiers and the people. But the Senate, the very institution he serves, has declared him an enemy of the state, fearing his power, and has ordered him to come home alone. He knows that to obey is to face certain political and likely physical death. To disobey is to plunge the entire Roman world into a catastrophic civil war. For a moment he hesitates. Then, with the legendary words, "The die is cast," he leads his single loyal legion across the water. This is the story of Gaius Julius Caesar, and the day he chose to murder a republic in order to save himself. Before he was a traitor, Julius Caesar was Rome's greatest champion. Born into an old but impoverished aristocratic family, he was a man of boundless ambition and superhuman talent. He was a brilliant orator who could captivate the masses, a cunning politician who navigated the treacherous waters of the Roman Senate, and above all, a military commander of unparalleled genius. In a brutal 9-year campaign, he had conquered all of Gaul, modern-day France, a feat that no Roman had ever dreamed possible. He had added a vast, rich territory to the Republic, killed 1 million Gauls, and enslaved 1 million more. He sent back tales of his heroic exploits that made him a living legend in the streets of Rome. But his very success made him dangerous. The Senate, a body of powerful conservative aristocrats known as the optimates, saw Caesar's immense popularity and the fanatical loyalty of his veteran army as an existential threat to their power. Their champion was Pompey the Great, Caesar's former ally and now his bitter rival. As Caesar's command in Gaul came to an end, the Senate, backed by Pompey, ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. It was a political death sentence. Caesar knew that the moment he gave up his command, his enemies would descend upon him with lawsuits and trumped-up charges to destroy him. He was trapped. His choice was simple: submit to his own destruction or plunge the world into war. If you love stories of epic ambition and high-stakes political drama, hit that like button and let us know in the comments where you are watching from in the world today. In January of 49 BCE, Caesar made his choice. The crossing of the Rubicon was an act of open rebellion, a declaration of war against the Roman state. But he did not march with a massive army. He marched with only one legion, the 13th, a force of perhaps 5,000 men. It was an insane gamble. He was invading his own homeland with a tiny force, facing the full legitimate might of the Republic, which could call upon hundreds of thousands of soldiers from across the Mediterranean. But Caesar held a trump card: speed. While the Senate debated and Pompey slowly mustered his legions, Caesar moved with the lightning speed that had terrified the Gauls. He swept down the Italian peninsula, his veteran army moving faster than any messenger could report his position. City after city opened its gates to him, not as a conqueror, but as a returning hero. The people loved him, and the local garrisons, unwilling to fight the legendary conqueror of Gaul, defected to his side. The panic in Rome was total. The senators who had so arrogantly demanded Caesar's surrender were now in a state of terror. They had expected a long negotiation, not a blitzkrieg. Pompey, their great champion, made a shocking and fateful decision. He declared that Rome could not be defended. Instead of fighting for the capital, he abandoned Italy entirely, evacuating his legions and the majority of the Senate across the Adriatic Sea to Greece. His plan was to use the vast resources of the eastern provinces to build a massive army and then return to crush Caesar. Caesar marched into Rome unopposed, a master of the city his enemies had just fled. He addressed the remaining citizens not as a tyrant, but as a defender of the people's rights against a corrupt and arrogant aristocracy. But he knew the war was far from over. He was in a perilous position. He controlled Italy, but he was trapped. Pompey's legions in Spain controlled his rear, and Pompey's massive navy controlled the seas, cutting him off from supplies and the rest of the empire. Caesar, the great gambler, was now facing a war on two fronts against a foe with overwhelming resources. Instead of chasing Pompey to Greece, Caesar made another bold and unexpected move. He decided to deal with the threat to his rear first. In one of the most brilliant campaigns of his career, he took a portion of his army and, in just 27 days, marched to Spain, confronted the powerful Pompeian legions there, and defeated them through a series of masterful maneuvers, all without a single major battle. With a characteristic lack of modesty, he would later say, "I went to fight an army without a general and returned to fight a general without an army." With Spain secured, he turned his attention to the main event, Pompey. In the winter of 48 BCE, he gathered his fleet and, in an incredibly risky crossing, ferried his army across the Adriatic Sea, landing in Greece. The campaign there went disastrously at first. At the Battle of Dyrrhachium, Caesar's starving and outnumbered army suffered a humiliating defeat when they tried to besiege Pompey's much larger force. Caesar's line broke, his men were routed, and his army was on the verge of complete annihilation. He was only saved when Pompey, ever cautious, refused to press his advantage and order a final crushing pursuit. Caesar famously remarked, "The war would have been over today if only their enemy had a commander who knew how to win." Humiliated but not broken, Caesar was forced to retreat inland. The Pompeian camp was ecstatic. The arrogant senators believed the war was already won. They began to refer to Pompey as Agamemnon, King of Kings, and argued amongst themselves over the spoils of their impending victory. They pressured Pompey to abandon his patient strategy of starving Caesar out and to seek one final glorious battle. Stung by their insults and confident in his massive numerical advantage, Pompey agreed. He pursued Caesar's retreating army to the plains of Pharsalus for a final showdown. The armies that met at Pharsalus were a study in contrasts. Pompey had over 45,000 legionaries and a massive cavalry force of 7,000, outnumbering Caesar's horsemen 7-1. Caesar had just 22,000 exhausted and half-starved veterans. The plan for Pompey was simple. His unstoppable cavalry would smash Caesar's weak flank and then envelop his entire army from the rear. It was a foolproof, conventional plan. But Caesar was not a conventional general. Caesar, anticipating the cavalry charge, devised an ingenious and desperate counter. He secretly pulled his best and most hardened centurions from his legions to create a hidden fourth line. He ordered these men to hold their ground to receive the cavalry charge not by throwing their javelins, but by using them as stabbing spears, aimed directly at the faces of the aristocratic Roman horsemen. As the battle began, everything went according to Pompey's plan. His cavalry charged and broke Caesar's horsemen, but as they surged forward, they were met by the sudden, terrifying appearance of the fourth line. The legionaries, as ordered, stabbed at the faces of the riders, who panicked and fled in a shameful rout. The trap had been turned. The weapon that was supposed to win the battle had been utterly broken. With Pompey's cavalry gone, Caesar's flank was secure. He now unleashed his own cavalry and his fresh third line into the battle, smashing into the flank and rear of Pompey's legions. Pompey, watching from his command post, was paralyzed by disbelief. He simply could not comprehend how his perfect plan had failed. He abandoned his army, walking back to his tent like one thunderstruck. Leaderless and attacked from three sides, his massive army collapsed and was annihilated. Pompey the Great fled the battlefield, a fugitive. He would eventually make his way to Egypt, seeking refuge, but was treacherously murdered on the orders of the young pharaoh's advisors. When Caesar arrived and was presented with his rival's severed head, he was said to have turned away and wept. But his war was not over. He would spend the next several years mopping up the remaining pockets of senatorial resistance, fighting brutal battles in North Africa and Spain, showing a new and terrifying lack of mercy to his fellow Romans. The Civil War was not just a political struggle. It had become a bloody, world-spanning purge. In 45 BCE, Caesar returned to Rome, the undisputed absolute master of the Roman world. The Republic, for all intents and purposes, was dead. It was an institution designed to be run by an aristocracy, and Caesar had systematically destroyed that aristocracy on the battlefield. He was declared dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. He began a series of sweeping reforms, reorganizing the calendar, rebuilding cities, and drafting a new constitution that centered all power in his own hands. He was a king in all but name. But his ambition and his disdain for the old republican traditions had created powerful enemies. A group of senators who saw themselves as patriots and liberators began to conspire against him. They called themselves the Liberators, and their leader was Marcus Junius Brutus, a man Caesar had pardoned and treated like a son. On the Ides of March in 44 BCE, they surrounded him at a meeting of the Senate and stabbed him to death at the foot of a statue of his great rival Pompey. They believed they were saving the Republic, but they had only succeeded in killing a man and creating a martyr. The death of Julius Caesar did not restore the Republic. It plunged the Roman world into another 13 years of bloody civil war. A conflict that would only end when Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, finally defeated all his rivals and became the first true Roman emperor, Augustus. The murder of Caesar was the final, convulsive death throe of a system that had been dying for 100 years. His life serves as a timeless story of how a republic, weakened by corruption and internal division, can fall to the ambition of a single, brilliant man. If you believe stories like this are a crucial lesson from history, please hit that like button to help spread this message. And for our final question, do you believe Caesar was a tyrant who destroyed the Republic? Or was he a necessary evil who saved Rome from its own self-destructive chaos? I'm fascinated to read your verdicts in the comments below, and if you want to see more deep dives into the lives of the titans who shaped our world, make sure you subscribe to Wars in History. Thanks for watching.